I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. Welcome to our Tuesday webinar. With us today is Anna Hall, CEO of Northeast Charter Schools Network, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSID, Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, and Corey Callahan, General Counsel and VP of Legal Policy at the New York City Charter Schools Center. It is only Tuesday, and already it's a busy week. There's a lot to cover today, and so we'll get started with the big headline, and that is that the U.S. Department of Education announced that they will not approve requests for blanket waivers on state assessments, including the one requested by New York State. State assessments can be shorter, take place over a longer period of time, take place at a later date, and or be administered remotely, and schools won't be held accountable for the results. But again, waivers like the one New York submitted will not be granted, not be approved. I know there will be lots of questions about this, so we'll return to this topic after the other updates. The CARES Act Round 2 funding allocations won't be finalized until after the state budget is enacted, which is expected to be April 1st. As you're thinking about budgeting and spending, we recommend waiting until there's more clarity before including that funding in your budgets. Governor Cuomo issued an executive order yesterday that requires teachers to report to their school if they have received the vaccine. So teachers that have received the vaccines must report that information to the school. It specifically states as well, the executive order specifically states as well, that that teachers are not required to receive the vaccine. Beginning this week, schools will be required to report weekly the number of completed COVID-19 vaccinations, as well as the number and percentage of teachers instructing students in person. And this information is the information from the prior week. We have reached out to New York State Department of Health for more details on the requirements, including how the information should be collected and updates on what you will see in the report card portal. We will report back to you as soon as we have that information. The immunization grace period for fully remote students has been extended again. It has extended to March 11th. The executive order authorizing remote meetings is extended through March 16th, 2021. So again, I'll repeat those. So we have dazzling dates here. Immunization grace period for fully remote students is extended to March 11th. Executive order authorizing remote meetings extended through March 16th. A judge in New York City ruled that New York City DOE must provide COVID testing to charter schools in the same manner the testing is provided to district schools. New York City has announced they plan to appeal. I'm sure Corey will say more on this later. A reminder about a few events this week. Tomorrow, Wednesday, 24th, from 5 to 9 p.m., the Buffalo Charter High School Open House will be held virtually for families in Buffalo looking for great schools for their students. And we'll be dropping a link for this in the chat. There's also a webinar coming up for summer opportunities through the National Summer School Initiative that will be held on the 25th. There's a registration link and information. We'll drop that in the chat as well. Also, tomorrow, the 24th, from 6 to 7 p.m., we will be hosting a ranked choice voting event with our partners for New York City families. And all school and community members. So don't miss this event to learn about the ranked choice voting process. And remember that the last day to register to vote in New York City elections this year is March 28th. See the link in our chat. We dropped in the flyer that includes all of our partners for this event. And thank you to our partners. Finally, in honor of Black History Month, the first installment for 2021 of the Race Justice Equity Series will be this Thursday, the 25th, from 4 to 5 p.m. Please join the conversation with panelist Ray Ankrum, Superintendent of Riverhead Charter Schools, Rafiq Kalam, co-founder and managing partner, Embra Charter Schools, Walter Larkin, Jr., CEO of University Preparatory Charter School for Young Men, Dr. Paul Miller, CEO and principal of Green Tech High School Charter School, and Dr. Christopher Manning from Buffalo Creek Academy. I'm joined for a discussion on Black men as educators, leaders, and founders. We speak about education, the importance and experience of Black male educators, and about the realities of the promise and potential, and of course the challenges and achievements of Black male students. The event will be part webinar, part meeting with an open discussion and Q&A. We're dropping a link in the chat for more information about all of these events. As I said, we hope to see you at all of these. Now, those are our updates. David, Susie, and Lori. Well, Lori's not with us. David and Susie, we're not sure. Lori may join us later. We'll catch up with her then. David and Susie, welcome. We'll start with your updates, but also, of course, please speak to how you are thinking about and what you may be hearing about the U.S. Department of Education's new announcements regarding state tests. And we'll start with you, Susie.
I think I'm really interested in understanding how all of the states, including the lovely, fine Empire State, is going to execute on that, given all of the other parts. And I'm going to say my hunch is David doesn't have answers to how all of that is going to get executed on. But I think one of the roles that we can all play is think about where the opportunities are to get our kids, assessed this year under some similar ruler for standards. The value in it, I think, my former teacher hat is firmly on my head. I would, as a former teacher, love to know where my kids are. As ranked, by some external entity. I certainly would have opinions about what my children had been able to achieve during the pandemic, but I think relative to a broader set of students, that's really great that the Biden administration is interested in creating a pathway for that to happen. But I will acknowledge that I think there are probably some individual statewide complications across many states that we're going to have to iron out. And to the extent that we can be helpful as a charter community in helping David and his colleagues think about what we can do in New York, I'm all behind that. So that's my reaction, Yumika. But I wanted to just a couple of announcements. As many of you know, we have a charter schools committee meeting tomorrow, another batch of renewals that we're super excited about, and happy to Zoom host a number of the leaders and board members and team members of the schools that are up for renewal. So looking forward to that. Our next meeting is on March 17th, and fingers crossed, by St. Patrick's Day Eve, we can all have a little corned beef and cabbage and celebrate the end of the SUNY renewal season this year. I wanted to also, I'm going to put in the chat, just kind of remind everyone, I hope I've done it right. If it doesn't come through, I wanted to remind everyone about Chancellor Malatris's announcement this week about the Big Dream, Small Step SUNY outreach, especially to schools that are serving high school graduates and seniors. SUNY's making a big push because we anticipate the next few years are going to be one where SUNY can be a great resource to graduates, but certainly SUNY charter graduates in acquiring some higher education skills and knowledge, because post-COVID, a solid college degree is going to be super important. And so wanted to share that. And then finally wanted to, two more things. One is to thank everyone who has been answering our requests via Epicenter as to whether you're hybrid or fully remote, and how that is working. John Flack, actually on our team, is the answer guy. If you've got questions, reach out to John. But it's been really helpful. Thank you for doing that for us. We're going to be able to update the trustees tomorrow. John sent me the latest data from all of you. just a little bit ago. And so I really appreciate it. And lastly, a big shout out to Uncommon Schools, who's created a new blog called Uncommon Sense, sharing instructional best practices. And I know a lot of you, it's going to be, we're going to try to promote all of these things in my weekly email. And I know a lot of you are sharing out the high quality practices that are happening in our charter schools. And the more you inform us about that, the more we can share that out. And we really appreciate it. So look forward to hearing from all of you. And with that, I think that's my update.
All right, great. Thank you, Susie. David, you can jump right in.
Hey, everyone. I just have two quick updates. One is just a reminder that the COVID-19 CSP grant, the little micro grant that we have running, is due in less than a week from today. And I sent out a reminder email to the whole sector earlier today. So I hope you got that email. If not, update your SEDREF. The link to the survey is, that's right, micro, who can't use $50,000, $49,950, but who's counting? And the link—
That's holding anyone back, David. I'll pitch in the remainder to get you to $50,000 personally.
Well, don't leave the money on the table. So far, 69 Ed Corps have submitted, 197 have applied but haven't hit that submit button yet. Make sure you hit the submit button at the end of the application. Sorry, 69 submitted, 128 haven't hit submit. There's 197 in total. The application's open until March 1st at midnight or 11:59, and so make sure that you get that in. And then lastly, we also we finalized our new school RFP. So it's up on our website, and I put a link to that as well. But most importantly, do not leave that $50,000 on the table. What school couldn't use some extra money? So that's all I have for today.
Okay, I'm going to have a follow-up question, if I can, just on the DOE announcement, and get your thoughts on what you think the implications could be from low participation rates from schools, either charter or districts. The memo states, quote, the flexibility as a result of a waiver that New York State Education could request would explicitly include waiving the requirement that the academic achievement indicator be adjusted to account for a participation rate below 95%. Any thoughts on what you think that might mean for charters?
Well, I know regarding the entire letter that we're examining all possible options, and from SED's perspective, it's too early to talk about what might happen because we're working out those details with the U.S. Department of Education.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Susie, you want to add anything, or you're all right? So stay tuned, everyone. Lots of updates to be expected on that, as well as the vaccine. And with that, Anna, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. And so, Yumika, I'm going to ping it right back to you, if you don't mind reiterating the bullet earlier about the new executive order. And this is really late breaking news. It came out only earlier today about teacher reporting vaccination and then school reporting.
Okay, sure. So the executive order, which was issued yesterday, requires teachers who have received the vaccination to report that to their schools. It is not a requirement that they get a vaccination, but if they have received one, they are required by now the executive order, which is law, to report that information to schools. Schools, in turn, have to report on a weekly basis the number and percentage of instructors, instructing students in person, and that information is for the prior week. So schools report number of people reported they received the vaccine, percentage of teachers instructing students in person during the prior week. And we have reached out to your state Department of Health to ask for more information again about any specifics for the reporting details for the portal, as well as how that information from teachers will be collected, any storage information, that kind of thing. So that's what we have. And again, as soon as we hear back from New York State DOH, we will update you.
Thank you. And so just connected to that question in the Q&A from Anne, you mentioned that teachers must report vaccinations to schools. If they're working remotely due to a medical exemption, are they required to report to work? And just to clarify my understanding, this executive order is requiring nothing about becoming vaccinated or reporting to work. It is just that if you are a teacher who is employed at a school and you have become vaccinated, you have to report it to the school. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, and I should add, I should actually, that's glad you asked that, clarify that the teachers have to report that. You're right, teachers have to report only if they receive the vaccine, but they only do that if the school requests it. So if the school does not request for teachers to do this, teachers do not have to report that. But if it's school, in this case, the executive order actually says to their employing school and school district the information. So districts and schools have to take the first action to say, we want this information from our teachers, and then teachers who have received the vaccination have to report it to the schools. And there's nothing here to require them to be vaccinated, to report in person or anything like that. It's simply reporting whether or not you received the vaccine.
Yeah, and that's something that I was intrigued about in terms of the executive order, because if schools are required to report, does this not mean that they're required to request? Do you see what I'm saying? Like if teachers are only required to report if the school requests, but the school is required to report, could a school choose to not request or not?
On its face, on the executive order, it would appear that schools are free to not request that information. However, the executive order also allows that the Commissioner of Health can promulgate additional rules or requirements in support of the executive order, and that may be one of the things that they do as well. Say, okay, so here's our portal, here's the information, here's how you will collect the information, here's how you will submit the information, and you are required to request this information from your teachers.
And so,
and again, we're all clarifying information from DOH.
Yeah, and so a couple of questions that are in the chat or that are in the Q&A, Andrea, we can repost. Becky, if you could repost the link that I put in the chat earlier to the specific text of the executive order, we're happy to do that. And so then, Yumika, another, at the risk of just going executive order crazy here, the language that I'm seeing in the executive order uses the word teachers, but we have a great question in the Q&A about, does that apply to other school personnel, or is it really only about teachers? And even if at this moment, if it's only about teachers, would you give schools any guidance about other school personnel?
So I would say that the executive order explicitly says teachers, right? A teacher employed, and it mentions teacher again, as it says, any teacher to receive. So right now, it is teachers. However, remember that the DOH can promulgate additional rules, and that language, of course, is in the executive order as well. So they could then require or define, I should say, as well, what a teacher is. Teacher may be, for purposes of this executive order, be defined as school staff, anyone's in a classroom, or school leadership, anyone in the building. And again, so that's information, the kind of information we hope to get back from New York State DOH quite shortly.
Thank you. So now maybe passing the hot seat talking stick here to talk a little bit about state tests. So a couple of questions in the Q&A about the potential ability to administer state tests remotely. And so I think I'm combining a couple of them here, but could state tests be administered remotely without schools being penalized? And if so, potentially how could that look? And I know, Susie, I think you made the great point. We don't necessarily know right at this moment. And I know, David, that SED has previously had a really strong position that it's not desirable or possible or advisable to administer the test remotely, but would love to hear even any early and potentially new pre-mortems on this question of remote administration, given the sort of new perspective from USDOE.
So department's previous position on administering the state assessment remotely was that only schools that administered the state assessment remote or through CBT, computer-based testing last year were eligible. And that had to do with a variety of bandwidth issues, literally and figuratively. So it's not just a switch, but there's a lot of you need to ensure that you have server space, and you need to train teachers and students on the use of testing in the computer-based environment. I'm not sure if that position will change. I do think it's still too early to tell how the department will proceed regarding the letter that we received last night from the USDOE regarding the blanket waiver or lack thereof for state assessments. But it's something that the department is considering. I shouldn't say considering. It's something that that is on the department's radar. And as soon as there is information, I will be sure to share it with you. Unfortunately, that is all I know right now.
Susie, do you have any, your magic 8-ball? It doesn't give it an extra big shake? No? All signs point to no. It's unclear. The future is unclear. I feel like we need all the magic 8-ball possible responses right now. So relatedly, and great question from James Martin, super specifically, so that the NYSAA, so the alternative assessment window, actually begins in a little more than a week. And there's a mandated training process. Do you think that David, will be updated, suspended, amended, decorated? I don't know, like any of the edits that could possibly be true?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's something that I know is at the forefront of Julie Fisher's mind, who's the head of school at the SUNY authorized New York Center for Autism. She asked me this question a while back too. And at this point, the alternative assessment is still scheduled, and students who are receiving entirely remote instruction are not expected to come to school solely for the purpose of taking that assessment. There's a code that can be entered by the test coordinator for students called receiving entirely remote instruction. As someone who has not gone into that testing environment, I'm not sure where it is in the process, but in where the field is. But just look for that receiving entirely remote instruction, and students can, and you can indicate that. But I do want to emphasize that although this alternative assessment is scheduled, that if you're entirely remote, you don't need to come. The expectation of the department is that you don't need to come to school in order to take that assessment. But we actually have a great student assessment team, and their email address is emscassessmentinfo@niced.gov. And I'll put that in the chat. I just have to type it out, but they're a great resource. And if you have any other questions, I'd recommend reaching out to them.
I think that's great. I appreciate that. And I would just say, at the risk of like bombarding chat stuff, I really think the USDOE memo is worth reading. And so I'm re-putting it here because I do think that it will have it sort of implies some answers to some of the questions here. It's only like 2.5 pages long, shockingly, for a USDOE memo. But so for example, Lisa asked a question, and 75% of my students have opted for 100% remote instruction. I'm concerned about how we'll be able to do testing if these families do not want their children to attend in person. Even Lisa, the USDOE memo says, and Dee Schiraldi is saying something similar. The memo explicitly states a sentiment that Dr. Cardona expressed in his confirmation hearings, which is that he and his department, presuming his confirmation, which actually hasn't taken place yet, would not want or expect students to attend school in person for the exclusive purpose of taking a state test. And so I do think that there are a lot of, sort of nuances for SED, New York State Department of Education, to contemplate when figuring out all of the flexibilities that USDOE has offered, but still providing the sort of baseline expectation that these tests will take place in some form or another. And I just to reiterate again, and thank you, David, in advance, a future communication. So Wendy asks, when can we expect the exams to be delivered to schools? We don't know, because I think that will hugely even depend on what the tests are, and whether they are significantly similar to ones that have been produced in the past, or whether they're are really different. So Ariane asks, given that there's no official testing waiver for New York State exams, we are planning mock testing in the building during the week of March 15th. We're 100% virtual through June of 2021 and would only be returning to the building for practice exams. Can a school require staff to come into the building? I have an opinion on that based on some of the HR webinars that we've hosted, but I'll reserve my commentary and let other folks share their thoughts.
I am not a labor attorney, and so I would recommend that you reach out to your counsel regarding that, unless anyone else has any other information they can share.
I am also not a labor attorney, but I would refer folks to a great webinar that we had with a great labor attorney back in January. And the short answer is yes. The longer answer is depending on legal accommodations that staff at your school have requested and that you have potentially granted or would need to grant if they had not otherwise previously had the expectation of being in person. Corey, as the legal eagle among us in this moment, I don't know if you have any other words of wisdom to share.
Yes, though, as the sector knows, I always like to say, but I am not your lawyer. But yes, I agree. I think that there absolutely is a way that you could do it. But if you are a school that has not gone through a reasonable accommodations process with your staff, you would have to start that now. So it would just take some time for you to figure out who might need a reasonable accommodation, such as not coming into the building if you were going to be doing mock testing.
Awesome. And then just for the sake of completeness, and then Corey, I'll turn it over to you because I think Lisa and Stacy's questions are New York City specific questions, although Stacy's might be potentially a New York Department of Health question. But so Wendy asked one more, what happens if a school is already remote through the end of the year? And Wendy, just for the sake of completeness, but David, correct me if I'm wrong, the USDOE memo, which is in the chat, highly recommend you read, says that there is no expectation that students would come in exclusively for the purpose of the state test. But I think that once schools know what the parameters are, everyone should look carefully at them and think about what the opportunities are for their school community to gain super important student data, as Susie said earlier, in whatever way is sort of a best fit for their school community and the state's requirements. Woo.
I would
This is
agree
part
that
one of
that's what,
many, I think. Yeah,
yeah,
go
that's
ahead,
what the
David.
memo says.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm sure there's more to come on the state testing front, and but probably a lot more conversation before the tests themselves even appear. So Corey, with that, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. So yeah, DOE could not make it today, unfortunately, but they will be around on Friday. So I know a bunch of you have already sent me Department of Health questions. If you have any DOE questions that did not get answered, you should send those as well. I just posted the link to register in the chat. I know, just want to address some of the question. One big question that we've been receiving a lot from you is regarding the memo that went out last week from SED, and then a revised memo went out 2 days later, clarifying about schools' ability to require students to sign, or their families to sign consents for COVID-19 testing as a condition to be in-person schooling or sports. The memo covered both of those topics. The clarification, as I understand it, that was released last Thursday basically said if the local health authority is allowing an exception to be made for that district, then schools are allowed to do it. So as I'm sure you've all seen very publicly, New York City DOE is continuing their program of requiring any student who opts into hybrid education to have their parents sign a consent form for COVID-19. A bunch of you sent us emails. It's already been sent out to all the middle schools who are opening this week. So from our perspective, we've checked with DOE. They are, of course, checking with DOH, but I expect the same will be for New York City charter schools. So if you're a New York City charter school, you're going to get the same allowances as DOE with respect to if you want to continue your policy or start it, depending on when and if you're going back. About mandating consents for testing. So again, we will address this on Friday with DOH staff directly, but just wanted to let you know where that's heading because I know several of you were concerned about that because you've already sent messaging to parents. The other question I saw in the chat I'll just do, which is on testing, is as a charter school in co-located space, are you required to do COVID-19 testing as a requirement to attend? And the answer is no, unless you're in a state mandated yellow, orange, or red zone. So for right now, I think there are some, so I don't want to say there are none, there are very few, but there are some charter schools that are in the yellow zones. There are no orange and red zones right now in the city. But if you are not in one of those zones, you are not required to do any testing. If you want to do the testing to match what the DOE is doing or your own internal policy, that is your prerogative, but you're not required. So that leads us to, as Yumika mentioned at the beginning, we were very excited to learn late Friday night that we won the first round, I will say, of our lawsuit to, compel the district to do what we believe under the law they are required to do, which is to provide the same health and screening services to New York City charter school students as they are providing to their own district students. The judge unequivocally agreed, and I will just tell you as a lawyer, it was a very gratifying decision to read. Terms such as the DOE's position, or I should say the city. I want to be very clear here. This is the city's position. It's not just the district. Is illogical, was good. So we are still moving forward as, the DOE has already said that they are planning to appeal, which is unfortunate. We are keeping up our campaign. I just want to say not only thank you to the 5 schools that are on the lawsuit, particularly Zeta, who helped us procure the pro bono counsel, but Ascend, Renaissance, Classical, Public Prep. We couldn't do this without you and your families that are on the lawsuit. And again, the hundreds of you that signed our petition that we put out in December, January, all of this is moving towards really pushing the city to stop this and just get to the business of setting up the testing in schools so that you guys can have have those same resources. So we will continue to push. We'll update you with timing. I know schools are reaching out, wanting to know what timeline is. It's very hard to say with the way the court system moves. Sometimes it goes slow, sometimes it goes fast, but we will obviously keep you posted. So just if Sandy, hopefully I answered your question about if the judgment as it is would include all charters, whether you're in co-located or private space in the COVID testing. Again, I will be clear that section of the law that we're referring to is 912, which actually states that the school has to request. So if you were a school that doesn't want to be part of the DOE's testing program, you just would not make a request to DOE to be part of the testing program. But if we are successful, which we think we will be, it would allow any school, any charter school in the city that wants to request the DOE provide the same COVID-19 testing that they are currently doing in all of their schools. I see Kate has asked some questions about updates on changes for quarantine, fully vaccinated exposed persons. I've been sending those questions continually. My understanding is there has been no updates, but we will make sure to address it again on Friday with the staff. I know a lot of folks this would change a lot of your internal policy, so I know this is top of mind. I don't have any answers today, but I know it is being definitely spoken about, and it will, be addressed to the extent they have any answers. And then Stacy's question, I haven't forgotten you. So again, we've asked this before, if there's going to be any revision to the 6 feet. I've heard folks say, well, maybe it's going to become 3 feet. I have not seen anything official out of New York State Department of Health, which I will just say for purposes of this kind of guidance, NYC DHMH has been very deferential to state. So I think we will probably have to wait until the state revises some guidance. But that is what we're waiting for. And then Martha, yes, it would apply to private space as well. The lawsuit was not filed on behalf of just charter schools in co-located space. It was filed on behalf of all charter schools. So it would not be just a co-located space. Though I will point out that the judge, when he heard that there were co-located schools with charters that were coming in one door and not getting the testing, and then on the other side he asked the DOE, well, can you explain how that actually is, making your system work? And they had to basically admit in oral argument that they couldn't, that it doesn't really make any logical sense to not have half the school tested if you are trying to screen. I'll post the link to the decision if folks want to read more. It's very short. It's only like 4 or 5 pages. And in terms of if it's not, so is there any New York City specific guidance on how to handle families that do not consent to routine COVID testing? So I think for purposes, and maybe this is for school, I don't know if you're outside of New York City. If you're in New York City, the memo from last week has had a revision on it that was released on Thursday. I bet David could find it for us and put it in the chat if you need to see it. But essentially what it said is that if the local health department advises the district that they are allowed to continue to mandate consents for testing, it could be okay to still require it. So in New York City specifically, the local health department has already approved New York City DOE's plan that mandates consent for testing. And so we are using that logic to say that the same would apply to all charter schools. So you would not need to change your position. If you're looking for guidance on how to just maybe talk to families about getting them feeling comfortable about COVID-19 testing, there might be other schools on here who might be able to share some resources of what they've done, because I know schools have been doing a lot of conversations and education with their families just to explain really what the testing is, how non-invasive it is, and the purpose behind it as well.
And I did post that memo, and I posted the wrong one at first, so use that second. But a great resource is whenever we get charter school memos or ones that are applicable to charters, we post them up on our website with that link, if anyone's interested.
Thanks, David. And I think the reopening plans that I see are for our authorizer friends. So I will turn it back over to you guys if anyone wants to take that.
Another great crystal ball question. Mine
not
says,
sure
all signs point to yes.
I'm not sure what SUNY will require, but I think it's too early for us to tell if we'll require reopening plans again.
I would say it's a little early now to understand what the ins and outs are going to be. One of the reasons, rightfully so, that I think we asked for them this year was to, help and make sure that if we were able to go back full time, that the Department of Health considerations were all being planned for. And so depending on what our friends at the Department of Health tell us about an all clear for schools in the fall, we will do our very best to not ask you to do extra reporting.
All right. I think that's it. I'm going to open it up. Last words, questions, comments, suggestions before we wrap. All right, we're all set. I want to remind everyone, please check out our events this week. There's lots of them. Please check in on Friday for those folks in New York City for the Charter Center DOE call. And we will see you next time. Goodbye.